Thank you for joining us on FutureTV. I'm Linda Tamim, and these are today's top stories. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri accuses Syrian President Bashar al-Assad of being the mastermind of all crimes in Lebanon as clashes continue in Tripoli. President Michel Sleiman warns that Christianity would be in limbo if Lebanon's free Christians disappear due to the changes in the region. And UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Valérie Amos demands stronger action by the UN Security Council to get desperately needed aid into Syria. 4 more people have been killed in Tripoli in overnight clashes between rival gunmen. The national news agency says the city witnessed the deadly gun battles on Friday night, but the clashes subsided after 1 a.m. Again, gunmen from the districts of Bab al-Tabani and Jabal Mohsen used machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades, killing 4 people and injuring dozens more. Reports say the army again responded to the sources of fire, but the intensity of the fighting decreased in the early hours of this morning. Military units were seen setting up a checkpoint at Abu Ali roundabout that links Tripoli with the northern city of Akkad. They were checking IDs and inspecting vehicles that took the major international highway. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri accuses Syrian President Bashar al-Assad of being the mastermind of all crimes in Lebanon and held the state responsible for the deteriorating security situation in Tripoli. In a statement issued by his press office, Hariri said it was useless to find ways to resolve the cabinet crisis, hold a parliamentary session, or resume national dialogue after the recent events in Tripoli. He says there is a dirty war that the Syrian regime has launched on the city and its residents through its political partners. Hariri added that the order to punish Tripoli was issued as soon as the Internal Security Forces Intelligence Branch arrested a network of responsible for deadly car bomb attacks that targeted 2 mosques in the city. The former Prime Minister further criticized the President, Prime Minister and Army Commander for holding security meetings in vain, accusing the state of allowing the city to become a ground for armed chaos. The Mufti of Tripoli and the North, Sheikh Malik al-Shahad, stresses that the situation in Tripoli is not sectarian, but is rather based on the side's allegiance to a foreign country. During a meeting for the Higher Islamic Council at Tripoli's Dar al-Fatwa, Shahad said, "We reject to slip into any sectarian strife." He called on the security forces to end the battles between the rival neighborhoods of Jabal Mohsen and Bab al-Tabani and demanded the arrest of the criminals. He also praised the efforts undertaken by the Lebanese judiciary to unveil the violators. The Lebanese army and security forces plan to take all necessary measures to restore stability and peace in Tripoli, particularly after Prime Minister Najib Mikati assured his Grand Sarai visitors that all political cover has been lifted off for those causing strife. Voices have risen among certain political factions lately, demanding Mikati and Tripoli ministers recoil following a series of violent clashes in the northern city. Mikati said meetings held between top officials in the past 2 days stressed a strict and balanced control for the situation in Tripoli. He added that restoring security in the city and ending the bloodshed was a priority. President Michel Sleiman warns that Christianity would be in limbo if Lebanon's free Christians disappear due to the changes in the region, but he voiced confidence on the fate of the 2 bishops kidnapped in Syria. Sleiman's comments came during his speech at the first conference on the Christians of the Orient in the Mitten town of Rabwe. Coexistence does not only mean Christians and Muslims living together, says Sleiman. Rather, coexistence means engaging in continuous dialogue with the other and preferring the nation's identity over the religious one. He adds it also means the participation in governance as part of mutual consent. Sleiman says the future of Christians does not come through isolation or Western military protection, which is a provocative project. UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Valérie Amos has demanded stronger action by the UN Security Council to get desperately needed aid into Syria, where 2.5 million people in need have not received help for almost a year now. Amos says the situation in Syria continues to worsen and calls for Security Council members to lend individual political support to make the presidential statement issued by the Council a few weeks ago more effective, in her words.
Diseases, including those easily preventable by basic hygiene and vaccination, are spreading at an alarming rate. Just last week, we received reports of polio cases in Deir ez-Zor, which, if confirmed, will mark the first polio outbreak in Syria in 14 years. Yet, Mr. President, despite our best efforts, the humanitarian response in Syria remains severely insufficient compared to growing needs. More than 3 months since my last briefing to the Council, we are still unable to provide assistance to an estimated 2.5 million people trapped in hard-to-reach and besieged areas, despite our attempts to use the provisions in the presidential statement to do much more. Many of the 2.5 million have not been reached for almost a year. Mr. President, this is a race against time. 3 weeks have passed since the adoption of this Council statement, with little change to report. Each day that passes without the parties upholding their most basic obligations results in more lives lost, more people displaced, more people denied access to the most basic services. As we deliberate, people continue to die unnecessarily. I call upon all members of the Council to exert influence and take the necessary action to stop this brutality and violence. This Council's leadership role is vital. Words, despite their ability to shock, cannot really paint a picture of the grim and gruesome reality of Syria today. I am extremely disappointed that we have not been able to make further progress. Thank you.
The UN Arab League envoy to Syria has arrived in Tehran for talks with the Foreign Minister of Iran. Lakhdar Brahimi is pressing a tour in the region to drum up support in preparation for an international peace conference in Syria, which may take place in late November. In Tehran, the veteran troubleshooter is to hold talks with Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, whose government is due to be invited to the talks dubbed Geneva II. Brahimi has already visited Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, Egypt, Kuwait, Oman, and Qatar to try to muster support for the talks on ending the 31-month conflict in Syria. And still to come in our program, U.S. President Barack Obama outlined his views toward a future budget, highlighting education, that and more after the break. Welcome back. Iran has executed 16 rebels following overnight clashes in which 14 border guards were killed close to the border with Pakistan. An Iranian prosecutor says authorities had executed 16 terrorists in the country's Sistan-Balochistan province in retaliation for the killings. He gave no details of any trial proceedings. Iran State TV reported earlier today that at least 14 Iranian border guards were killed in clashes with armed bandits, without providing any details on the identity of the group behind the killings. The area also has a history of unrest, with the mainly Sunni Muslim population complaining of discrimination at the hands of Iran's Shia Muslim authorities. Tunisia's ruling Islamists were due to hold a second day of talks with the opposition on resolving a crippling political crisis that erupted when suspected jihadists killed an opposition MP 3 months ago. The much-delayed national dialogue began yesterday after Prime Minister Ali Al-Araidi made a written commitment to resign and make way for a cabinet of independence headed by a new premier who is to be named within a week. Politicians from the Islamist Ennahda party and opposition members held intensive talks into the early hours of today to decide the makeup of the cabinet. Negotiators were to meet again during the day to form a commission of experts to finalize the proposed constitution and will set the timetable for their work in the coming week. U.S. President Barack Obama outlined his views toward a future budget, highlighting education as one of his key priorities. Obama emphasized that budget priorities should be dictated by common sense, especially with respect to how they might grow the economy, in his words.
A budget that cuts what we don't need, closes wasteful tax loopholes that don't create jobs, freeing up resources to invest in the things that actually do help us grow. Things like education and scientific research and infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports. This should not be an ideological exercise. We should use some common sense. What's going to help us grow? What's going to create jobs? What is going to expand our middle class? What's going to give more opportunity to young people? Those are the things we should be putting money into. But a budget is important because what a budget does is it sets our priorities. It tells us what we think is important, what our priorities are. And the stakes for our middle class could not be higher. If we don't set the right priorities now, then many of you will be put at a competitive disadvantage compared to other countries. If you think education is expensive, wait till you see how much ignorance costs.
And now for news around the world in brief. Demonstrators protesting against São Paulo bus fares vandalized turnstiles and ATMs and set buses on fire at the city's main station after a peaceful protest turned violent. The protesters gathered in the afternoon outside the city's municipal theater and marched to the bus station. At least one police officer was injured in the ensuing clashes. At least 39 people were killed and thousands evacuated as torrential rains wreak havoc in southeast India. Days of torrential rains have unleashed floods that have blocked roads, halted trains, and forced the evacuation of nearly 70,000 people from hundreds of low-rising villages. Many drowned or were swept away by ensuing waters or killed when weakened walls collapsed onto them. A magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck Japan's east coast. Japan's emergency agencies issued a tsunami advisory for the region that includes the crippled Fukushima nuclear site. Tsunamis of up to 40 centimeters were reported at 4 areas along the coast, but the advisory was lifted less than 2 hours after the quake. No damages were reported. An archaeological site in the midst of Peru's bustling capital has yielded yet another pre-Incan discovery, an undisturbed Wari tomb containing 2 corpses wrapped in ceremonial fabric. Archaeologists say the tomb, estimated to be more than 1,000 years old, was found at the Pulcana archaeological site in Lima. It contained the bodies of an adult and an infant, along with nearly 10 intact artifacts. Check it out.
Archaeologists in Lima have unearthed 2 mummies, an adult and a child, thought to be more than 1,000 years old. Researchers on Thursday said the remains likely belong to 2 individuals from the Wari civilization, which ruled in what is now Peru for some 500 years between 600 and 1100 AD. The tomb was discovered at the Great Pyramid of Huacapoclana archaeological site in the heart of Lima. When in good condition, Wari tombs can be identified by the ceramic and textile offerings placed around the dead. One of many reasons the archaeological team says the burial techniques are consistent with the Wari. Small children were often sacrificed, and it is common to find their bodies alongside adult ones. The child discovered with the adult mummy at Huacapoclana was likely sacrificed, according to researchers. The tomb was the 3rd significant find discovered at the site. The burial techniques, including fibers used in the wraps used to protect the mummies and burial masks, are all consistent with other Wari tombs found in the past. There is now a small museum dedicated to the ancient site, which predates the Incas. Peru is a country rich in archaeological treasures. It has hundreds of sites that date back thousands of years and span dozens of cultures, including the Incan Empire that was in power when Spanish explorers arrived in the early 1500s.
This marks the end of our bulletin for today. Now let me remind you of our headlines. Former Prime Minister Saad Hariri accuses Syrian President Bashar al-Assad of being the mastermind of all crimes in Lebanon as clashes continue in Tripoli. President Michel Sleiman warns that Christianity would be in limbo if Lebanon's free Christians disappear due to the changes in the region. And finally, UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Valerie Amos demands stronger action by the UN Security Council to get desperately needed aid into Syria. Those were your weekend headlines from us here at Future Television. Catch you in Naufal tomorrow for more updates. Until then, have a great evening.